A Matter of Price, Part 4. Marcellus and Parker descended to the ground. They had no trouble finding Conan. "They come," Conan said. "We are not that far from the Watchman's Cure," Marcellus said. "Let's go," Conan agreed. "Is this really the time for drinking?" Parker laughed as they ran. His joke, told in black humor, drew a small chuckle from Conan. The Watchman's Cure was a tavern that sold very strong ale. The innkeeper there did not believe in watering down his ale and wine to make more money by the volume of sales. His reputation for strong wine more than made up for the loss in revenue. Conan had never seen the tavern slim on patrons. In fact, there were often people sitting on makeshift tables or carpets outside the establishment, sipping the cure. Marcellus had long ago bribed the innkeeper to give their band access to the tavern's cellar, in which there was a secret door that led to a tunnel that in turn led to a warehouse. The plan seemed clear. Vanish from sight in the cellar, and then leave the warehouse to lay low in another part of the city. Conan hated to run, but he saw the sense against their foe. Garupar was not only skilled with the sword, he had the cult of Zath at his disposal. The thieves ran through the crowd and reached the cure. Once there, they did not enter through the front of the building from the street side, but rather they walked past it and between the narrow gap between the cure and the building next to it. They entered the cellar and locked it behind them to catch their breath. "Where is the girl?" Conan asked Marcellus. "On Kokona's back. I sped her to deliver the child to a convent. Perhaps Durle Mok will think twice before striking there. A cult war is not in his interest, I should think." "Fast thinking," Conan complimented the man. "Not as fast as your escape. I wish we had thought of it sooner. Perhaps we all could—" Marcellus's voice caught in his throat. "Nay, if we had just scaled down the wall, the civil guards would have poked us with their pikes. The fight he gave, causing them to spend more men up the stairs, is what let us escape," Conan said. "He was a good man, even to the end." Parker moved aside the hides that hid the secret door. He motioned for them to follow. They needed no light, well knowing the way. The three thieves traveled along the hidden tunnel, after barring the door behind them. They entered the cellar of the warehouse and risked a little light once they were inside its safety. They had stashed water, food, changes of clothes, and other tools needed for their trade. Marcellus did not wish to appear weak before his band, and he was holding his grief deep inside. Conan shared a look with Parker. The little Zomaran was clearly worried for the mental state of their leader. The dark cellar felt too much like a grave given their recent loss. Parker looked pitiful. He longed for something to say to comfort their leader, yet his normally pithy demeanor would make anything he said now seem like a cruel jest. With silent pleas he implored Conan to say something, anything, to ease the pain that Marcellus must be feeling. But Conan had not the words. "Parker, your arm," Conan suddenly mentioned. Parker looked down and noticed that his upper arm was scratched. The cut was not deep, but it oozed. Parker cursed softly and looked for something with which to bind it. He took fresh linen, clean water, and some line and needle from a box. Soaking the needle in alcohol, he threaded it and began stitching his wound. He performed the operation with a grace and skill equal to that of what Conan had seen from Pitambar. He wondered what it was that Parker had been trained to do before he became a thief. The little Zomaran finished the operation by binding the wound. He used no poultice as Pitambar did, but perhaps that was only because there was none to be found amongst his supplies. Conan reclined. There was nothing to do now but wait. But their repose was not to last. They heard a banging upon the door from which they had just entered the cellar. It did not sound like a fist, but rather the work of an axe. "How did they find us?" Parker asked. "The innkeeper must have betrayed us," Conan growled. "No. Listen," Marcellus replied. From the other side of the door, Conan and Parker could hear the occasional low growl of a dog. Their eyes fell to Parker's wound. A look of guilt and shame crossed Parker's face. "It's not," Conan began, but the little man refused to be comforted. "Zath," Parker said to the ceiling, "I understand you are angered that I pilfered your coffers, but you've worshippers aplenty, you eight-limbed bastard. To curse me with such luck now? I decry you. I refuse your patronage from now and for all time. I now worship—" Parker paused, confused. He turned to Conan. "Crom, by who you swear. He's a god, isn't he?" "Aye," Conan said. "I swear from now on my loyalty to Crom. Your petty vengeance, Zath, has robbed you of an adherent. Suck on flies, you poxy bastard," Parker finished. The thieves rose and drew their weaponry. The night of blood was not yet over. They did not seek escape, as it was likely that the cult of Zath had already surrounded the building. The trio of thieves made a rough line with Conan in the center. As the door began to chip and shatter near the locking mechanism, Marcellus patted his axe. He peered around Conan's massive chest and asked Parkar, "Why did you not swear your loyalty to Mitra?" Marcellus asked Parkar. "I doubt that Mitra, a god of law and order, would want another thief in his fold. He has priests aplenty. On the other hand, Crom seems pleased with Conan, so..." Parkar shrugged his shoulders to add power to his jest. "Heathens," Marcellus smiled. "Friends," Conan commented. The door burst open, and behind it came a dog. It was a large monster of a hound, easily 120 pounds. It went straight for Conan, who barely managed to deter it with a jab of his sword. The animal skipped back and then tried to lunge, but met the flat of Conan's blade. It whimpered as it skidded to the side and slumped. Conan had mercy for the poor animal. It was, after all, only doing what it had been raised to do. The same mercy, however, did not apply to the men. Nearly 10 men of the cult of Zath roared as they rushed the room. Parkar used his speed in the crates in the warehouse to their advantage. Rather than fight toe-to-toe, he ran through the crates, ambushing men from the side and flanks. His small daggers were ideal for the close confines of the darkened maze of products. Several times their attackers would rear back for a swing and find their weapon jammed in a curtain or fouled by a box. Marcellus was faring well. Being the heaviest armored of the trio, he had made his stand in the center of the room. His lorica blunted the badly aimed blows of the cultists, who were not used to fighting in the dark. Conan noticed that he was not using his tactical acumen to find any vantage point or better defense. It was unlike Marcellus to fight so recklessly. Conan knew why the man had chosen to stand in plain sight. There was not time to dissuade him, for in the dark Conan heard a whistling noise. The chakram impacted Marcellus in the chest. The lorica held and the weapon bounced off without cutting into the man's chest. Yet the weight of the impact was enough to distract him. Marcellus took one backward step and swung widely, thinking that the thrown weapon must have been the prelude to a rushing charge. He hit only empty air. For Garupar had anticipated this response. The Vengean came forward at a trot rather than a run, and with an overhand stab his tulwar dipped down into Marcellus's neck. The wound was not deep, and perhaps with the quick care Marcellus could have survived it. But once stung by the blade, he tried to backswing his axe at the Vengean, who in turn scuttled a half step away by turning and ducking. As the Vengean rose and continued his spin, he withdrew his other tulwar and used the spin to add force to his draw. His stabbing sword was now behind him, and the drawn sword flicked out and impacted along the back of Marcellus's hand. The wound was deep and accurately aimed. It nearly severed the man's right hand and sent his axe flying through the air. The weapon that had first drawn blood drew it again as Garupar brought it across Marcellus's throat. The tulwar had not the mass to sever the man's neck, but it did not need it. The blade, razor sharp, opened a gash along the other side of Marcellus's neck. Blood gushed from the wounds, and Marcellus fell to the ground. He landed on his side and twitched for a moment before he expired. "Crom!" shouted Conan as he slew a man in rage. His sword swatted away another probing attack, and he smashed it into a pillar that held up part of the roof. The pillar did not break, but the roof above it was partially rotted. The ceiling gave way and dropped a section of the ceiling down upon the men that were attacking them. In the moment of dust and debris, Conan and Parkar ran up the stairs. They reached the top of the stairwell and managed to lose their pursuers for a few moments. Parkar glanced out the windows of the warehouse. He ducked down and swore. "Crom!" he spat. "You need a deeper voice." "More anger," Conan jested. Parkar shook his head. "The street is filled with the city guards. There are pikemen, mace-wielding brutes, men with nets, and man-catchers are outside." "They mean to drive us into the street? Why for?" Conan asked. Parkar was silent. Finally he said, "To replace the girl for Zath, I should imagine." "Not likely," Conan said. "Do you think we can hold them long enough for Coconut to aid us?" Parkar asked. "If Coconut has any sense, she will stay away," Conan said. "We have to assume we are on our own." "But she wouldn't abandon us, would she?" Parkar said. Conan could not rule out the possibility. The thought had occurred to him, and while he was loath to betray a trust, he was experienced enough to know that sometimes it was the wiser decision. He set about making a barricade out of the boxes. "Find us something with which we can start a fire. Oil from lanterns or an alchemist's smoking stick. We need every advantage we can get," Conan said to Parkar. But there was no time. For as soon as Conan had said it, a chakram buried itself in the crate he had just set. Behind it came the charge of 4 men, perhaps all that Garupar had left of his squadron. Towards the Cimmerian and Zamrin, who hunkered behind the crates. Conan dodged a stab from a cultist and countered with a fist. The man staggered back stunned, and Conan gutted him with a swipe of his sword. As the man's bowels fell to the floor, Conan grabbed him by the throat and used the man as a shield against more of the circular darts the swordsman threw. He felt 2 more of the dreaded objects impact the man's back that Conan now used as a shield. From the corner of his eye, Conan watched as Parkar jumped back while a man tried to grab him. The tiny thief scratched the back of the man's hand with his daggers. Then he charged another advancing cultist, and with 4 rapid stabs to the man's chest, he killed his would-be attacker. "Crom!" Parkar squeaked. Then he yelped in surprise and had to duck and roll away from another attacker. Parkar came up behind the crates that Conan had erected and threw his dagger into the man. The wound was not fatal, but it caused the man to break his stride. In that gap, Parkar struck and cut the man's femoral artery. The man fell clutching his leg and mewling to his god for mercy. Conan ducked behind the crates just as another chakram impacted the body he held. A steady series of thuds from the missiles shook and resounded as they impacted the makeshift cover. "How many of those cursed toys does he possess?" Parkar asked in a panic. "I know not for sure, but his wrists were covered in them like a wandering woman's bracelets," Conan said. It was then that a chakram bounced off of the wall and rebounded to scratch Parkar's cheek. The wound was not severe, but that had not been the intent of its thrower. In a panic, Parkar rose from behind the crates to run. The second chakram caught him in the back of his neck and sunk into his neck bones. Conan watched as the man twitched and gurgled before he died. Conan had not time to stop the little man, and now he lay dying. Conan watched as the light left Parkar's eyes and his breath ended. An unfamiliar feeling, that of survivor's guilt, welled in the Cimmerian's heart. He growled in anger. "I believe it is just you, me, and the city guard now," Garupar called from the darkness. Conan did not return the jest. He wondered if the swordsman had targeted Parkar from the sound of the man's voice. Conan lowered himself as low to the ground as he could manage, and then began slowly crawling away from his cover. "I heard him swear by your foreign god," Garupar called. "Tell me about this Crom. Does he accept the brave, or does he only greet the foolish?" Now Conan was sure that Garupar was attempting to get him to make a noise. The second chakram that had ended Parkar's life had been thrown when he entered a space in which the moonlight was bright. Conan wondered if he could work his way slowly about the Vengeance and to a place where he could ambush him. Yet as fates would have it, it was not needed, for from outside the warehouse there came a sudden shouting and a chorus of panicked voices. Conan risked a quick peek out of a window, and from between its shutters he saw a group of men fall while on fire. From a roof above, an arrow pierced a watchman's throat. Kokona. Kokona had not abandoned them. She was attempting to cause the watch to break and run, and give Conan a chance to escape. He swore to himself that should they both live, he would show her exactly how much he appreciated her intervention. Conan grabbed a bottle that lay atop a crate. He tossed it in the darkness where he thought Garupar might be. He was rewarded by the sound of a chakram skidding off the stone where the bottle had struck. Gambling that Garupar had been armed with chakrams in both hands and would now be weaponless, Conan rose and charged. But to his surprise, he saw that Garupar was indeed armed with a tulwar in his primary hand. Upon his secondary hand, he spun 2 more of the chakrams on his fingers. Conan realized in an instant that the swordsmaster had perfected a technique where he could spin several of the hated discs at once, and with a flick of a finger, toss them from his spinning hand. The skill required for the feat amazed Conan. Conan changed the angle of his swing so that rather than strike Garupar, he would instead knock over a crate. The wooden box fell into the path of the chakram hurling towards Conan, and then it fell to the ground. Conan and Garupar were now face to face in the half-light of the warehouse. "I must say, you are the most inventive opponent I have met," Garupar commented. Conan did not reply. Admiration for the Vengeance's skill and hatred that the man had robbed him of his allies both warred in the Cimmerian soul. He took a breath and calmed himself. Rage would surely give the swordsman an advantage that Conan could not afford to offer. He knew now what he must do. He must lure Garupar out into the street so that Conan would have the advantage of his ally's bow. Firing into a combat between 2 swordsmen was dangerous. As the men moved and parried, it was terribly difficult for a sniper to get a clean shot. Yet Conan would have to get Garapar out into the street and hope that Kokona's aim was true. It seemed the only way he would survive this night. "No battle cry, then?" Garapar asked. Conan did not speak. "Very well," Garapar stated. With lightning quickness, he plucked a chakram from his belt, where it hung on a string. Conan flipped his sword in front of him so that the blade was flat against him. The flying disc impacted the flat of the blade, and unable to penetrate its steel, the disc fell to the ground. Garapar could not believe the Cimmerian's reflexes. He threw another chakram, this time fainting high before throwing low, only to see the Cimmerian pat his flying disc aside as well. The Vengean growled and began a flurry of thrown death. Some of the darts Conan dodged, others he deflected with his sword. He longed for the security of his shield, but none was within reach. Slowly Conan backed up towards the door of the warehouse, and Garapar followed with each throw. Then the assault stopped. The Vengean was out of chakrams to throw. Garapar drew his other tulwar now, and advanced towards the Cimmerian. Conan did not fear the outcome. He raised his sword briefly in salute to the man. The Vengean saluted the Cimmerian in kind. Then he rushed Conan from behind a wall of slashing steel. Garapar relied on keeping a constant rhythm of attacks directed at the Cimmerian. As one blade retracted to regain energy, the other was attacking. Conan had no choice but to give up more ground to the man. He kept his longsword close to his body, so that with only a minimal movement he could move it into the path of the attacks. The tulwars, designed to be used from horseback, were not well made for thrusting. Garapar would have to rely mostly on slices and swings of his weapons. Conan used this property of the tulwars against Garapar. Conan would occasionally make a lightly committed jabbing thrust that did not expose his chest or arms to a counterslice from Garapar. The thrust did not draw blood, but they did throw out the Vengean's attacking rhythm. It gave Conan time to breathe and look for an opening. Time was also on the Cimmerian's side. He was expending less energy than his attacker. Sooner or later, Garapar would either make a mistake or tire from the constant attacks. Conan continued to back up and give ground. Now they were in the street. The guards had panicked and fled. A few lay dead. Garapar roared, and Conan sensed that the tactics he had chosen were frustrating the man. Conan then caught a shadow moving out of the corner of his eye. Conan took a skittering step backward, creating room for Kokona. Garapar thought his opponent was trying to retreat, and he lunged. The speed of it was impressive. Conan barely had time to react, and beat aside the rising slice of the Vengean as he stepped. Kokona's arrow flew. Conan could hear it. But the experience of the Vengean saved him, for when his lead foot touched the ground and his body lowered, he slashed upward and performed a forward roll. By luck, the arrow passed through the air harmlessly where his body had been. The swordmaster's roll was not purely defensive, for as he rolled past Conan, he struck out with his tulwar. Now it was Conan's turn to enjoy luck's favor, for the blade's flat rather than its edge caught him above the ankle. Conan grunted and moved away. He could feel that the blunted attack had slowed his step. Placing weight on the injured foot produced a painful throb. Conan realized that this would mean that he could not defend himself as well. Kokona fired again, and this time the Vengean deflected the arrow with a swipe of his sword. Kokona blinked in disbelief. She reached for another dart to see if the swordsman could replicate the miracle, and she found her quiver empty. "What now, barbarian?" Garapar asked as he rose. "No more allies, no more tricks. Surely you are going to fall. Why not just submit? Accept your fate. I will make it quick." "You clearly have no idea of the character of Cimmerians," Conan replied. He should have had cause to worry since his ally was out of missiles to aid him. He heard men shouting on her rooftop and knew that she was now under attack. Yet Conan dared not take his eyes from the swordmaster. In the exchanges of blows, other men would have been merely glad to remain alive, but the battle-hardened insights of the Cimmerian had watched the exchanges from a part of his mind that he was not totally conscious of. The insights spoke of a fault they had noticed in Garapar's attacks. An idea came to Conan, whispered to him by his confidence in his subconscious. He placed his longsword slightly off the middle line of his center guard, to feint that he was preparing for a powerful blow, and then he waited. It was as basic a trick as warriors have ever devised. One presented an opening in one's guard to an opponent. The opponent, seeking an easy killing blow, would strike there. Since a warrior using the tactic could predict where the attack would be, it was easy to deflect it and counterattack or to evade it completely and strike. Conan had noticed that Garapar favored his right arm for striking, and that he tended to slash one way with his initial attack, and then the opposite direction on return. Thus, if he struck towards his inside and right on one strike, the next strike would be a rising left with the same weapon. Combined with the twin blade, this made for a very effective rhythm of attacks, but now that Conan could see the pattern, it also made Garapar predictable, because for each strike he would be somewhat restricted in the movement of one sword around the other, so that the weapons would not collide or his arms not be in position to produce enough leverage for a clean strike. Conan presented Garapar with an opening on his lower body to his left. The Vengean swordsman ignored it, apparently aware of the attempt to lull him into the trap. But as he became more frustrated and as his vigor faded, the temptation to sneak a quick slash into the apparent opening became stronger. Finally, after a series of 5 rapid blows, the Vengean chanced it. His tulwar sliced down and out to make the Cimmerian give ground. Then Garapar lunged and sliced up and in with the same weapon, while thrusting at Conan's face with his other sword. Conan beat aside the thrust as he stepped inside the arc of Garapar's swing. The tulwar impacted the Cimmerian's boiled leather jerkin, but since Conan was inside the arc of the weapon's swing, the killing energy of the tip was largely nullified. The blade sank into the leather, but barely produced more than a scratch on Conan's side. The pommel of Conan's longsword met Garapar's nose. The weight of the weapon crunched into the man's sinuses, and blood erupted all over Conan's chest as he smashed the man's face. The blow was so savage that it even collapsed some of the Vengean's top teeth beneath it. Garapar fell on his back, his hands went limp, and the swords fell from his hands. Reflexes took over, preventing rational thought from erecting a proper defense. Garapar let out a howl of pain, a horrid yowl of pain, and clutched at his face. Conan's sword swept across his throat, taking part of his jaw with it as it passed. Conan stood above the ruin of his foe and discovered he was panting. The pain now in his side registered. He felt his side and discovered he was not badly hurt. He would have yet another scar. He looked around his surroundings. The Zamarins of Aranjun and the other peoples all viewed him in silent awe. A moment later, and they were back to their illicit and illegal dealings. Conan felt disgusted. A display of swordplay and valor, unlike any these wretches were ever to see again, had passed before their eyes, and they lacked the awareness to appreciate it. He looked down to the dead Vengean swordmaster who had risked all for the love of his woman and sacrificed his self-respect for the sake of his art. Garapar had deserved a far better audience. Conan bent down and placed a hand on Garapar's chest. "I cannot forgive you for robbing me of my friends. Yet, I will sing of your skill and valor," he told the dead man. "May you find the peace in death that evaded you in life." Conan rose, not bothering to take the man's meager wealth or weaponry. He limped to where he had seen Kokona firing her arrows. He did not call her name, for he already suspected what he would find. He scaled the rough wall of the home. Even with his injured foot and side, it was an easy task for him. Conan pulled himself over the lip of the roof. He sighed. It was as he had feared. She had sold her life dearly. 5 cultists lay about her in death. She seemed to have grabbed the last man who had stabbed her in the gut and held him fast by the wrist while stabbing him to death with her dagger. The wolves of the steppe would have been proud of her. The wolves of the steppe would have been proud of their daughter. From the street came the sounds of people now wandering into evening's half-light. Some fought over the dead man's swords. Others went back to hawking their wares. Soon the scent of smoking meat and burning herbs was wafting through the air again. Conan reclined next to his dead friend as the whores below called out to new clients that passed beneath them.